Hello everyone and welcome to the playoff patch for the at least LCS postseason. Patch 12.15 is here. Let's take a look at what's the meta going to be, what's going to be great, what's going to be weak, and get into it. A lot of changes are aimed at pro play. Some are not, of course, here as well. There's some chance we probably won't see any. Some champs who were nerfed were in pro play in the first place, but we're definitely terrors in solo queue. So let's talk about what's going on here. First off, one of the suites of changes is buffs to energy champions. The intended design of energy as a mechanic, the reason it even exists is for a different combat pacing where in a general laning phase, they're always going to have, all the resources available, right? They can always, pretty much whenever they want, have a full combo available. They can spend to zero really quickly when doing things like wave clearing, but in general, in a holding pattern, give them 10 seconds. Okay, actually, I think it's 20 seconds, and they'll always be back to full power, and they can spend all their abilities. So I think that's the intent. On the one side, on the other, it means that in combat, they are somewhat burst-oriented, where they can press a lot of buttons, but they don't have a big pool of mana where Ahri can spend through 1,500 mana over the course of a team fight. Doesn't matter what her regen is. If her mana bar is full, she can just cast for the entire team fight, no problem. Veigar, Taliyah, etc. For someone like Akali or Shen or Kennen or Zed, which are the energy champions getting hit here, they are pretty front-loaded. And one thing that I said was going to happen is that, in the durability update, I thought it was going to really hurt. I specifically said mana, but the more accurate version is resource champions. Right? Someone like Ashe, yes, can run out of mana, but auto attacks are unlimited. Someone like Veigar or Swain or whatever can run out of mana, and someone like Akali and Kennen can run out of energy. And because energy pools are tuned relatively tight, and Akali's, for example, meant to burn her W to get energy to keep going for offense. She can't save it for defense. This means that, if you can't finish bursting someone, your champion maybe can't function very well. So this is all to say, to keep energy champions sort of up to date with the durability update, all the energy champions, or at least, I guess all the energy champions, at least in as well, are getting updates to energy costs or something else going on here. So Akali seems like it's 20 more energy on hitting W. Not a very huge change, but to be fair, she wasn't exactly terribly underpowered. All of my data, I'm going to cite Winrate once in this video, is going to be solo queue on the patch, all ranks, and using the website lolalytics.com for the source of the data. So across 71,000 Akali games, 49.5% win rate in the hands of the average player. Now, might that skew if it's an Akali expert? Of course. But relatively balanced champion for most players on average. 49.5 is pretty reasonable. This ends up being a very, very small touch, 0.2% win rate. Not much at all, but she will feel a little bit better. Next up is Gwen, who just simply has been taking over pro play as a result of the fact that they did a bunch of changes. They probably did alleviate some pro skew, but she's still seen incredibly commonly in pro play, and so they're cutting the Q snip from 3/4 conversion to true damage into only half conversion into true damage. This ends up being about a 1.25% win rate nerf to Gwen, so between 1.5. Her resting win rate for solo queue across 21,000 games is about 46.5% win rate. Not terribly high, don't get me wrong. It was, to be fair, around 48, which is pretty reasonable for solo queue, especially in average elo. Though, yes, again, she's a pro play problem, and so nerfed because of pro play. I assume ultra high elo pick ban is up there as well, but ultimately, a moderate nerf to Gwen as a result of mostly pro play. Now, this is a data table of Gwen's Q damage due to the opponent's magic resist with a couple of example targets. So this set is a default melee champion not running any runes. So 32 base MR plus 2.05 per level. And before, her Q was doing, 94 to 90% of the damage. Of course, again, 1/4 of it was dealing as true damage, so you're not getting it cut quite as hard as you might think. But now that only half its true damage, it's doing 88 to 80% damage overall. And that ends up being a 6 to 11% damage cut on the ability, which is a pretty meaningful nerf to one of her bigger damage abilities, right? This is, going to count for AP ratios, health scaling, all that stuff, because MR is a thing. Now, the other part of it, though, is if you were building a lot of MR, so maybe you're running a stat shard or two, and you're going to build 2 to 3 MR at the end of the game, plus 183 is the second column, where here's the old numbers, here's the new numbers, and it's, of course, a bigger nerf. Unsurprising that true damage conversion going down is a bigger nerf against tankier targets. So her tank busting certainly down. Again, her primary damage ability still has half true damage, so still a good tank buster. But again, even if you're not building MR, the damage is still down. She is certainly weaker now. There's situation. Again, 46.5%, 47% win rate for solo queue. Not a great spot for the average player, but again, pro play problem. Next up is Kalista, another big pro play champion, just simply losing 3 AD. Not a huge deal, but certainly matters. Was bordering on about 50% win rate in average players' hands before the patch. It loses about 0.75% win rate at 30,000 games of sample, so pretty reliably between 0.5 and 1% win rate down. Sitting at about 49% win rate as a champion. Kalista at 49 is honestly pretty reasonable. Kalista's been in a worse spot before where she was like a 45, 46% win rate champion and pro play pick ban, so in general, that gap is closed pretty well. Having a 49% win rate champion who is like occasionally in pro is a pretty good spot to be in, so I think this is a pretty well done nerf and probably does work out well, all things considered. Real quick data table, here is her base AD before and after. Nothing really exciting here, but those are the numbers. Kennen is getting a very small set of changes. Lower early cooldown on W. This is ability you max second, so you get the full 1 second, levels 1 through 7, 2 through 7, whatever. And then by level 13, the cooldown is the same, but you're also getting a 10 flat damage add on W, so definitely a lot more to affect the early landing phase. And then a small AP ratio buff to the ultimate, not bad either. Let's talk about what's going on here. Here is the Kennen W cooldown. Again, not a huge difference, but W is auto hit, so if you can either land your third hit W passive, or you can land a Q, or whatever else, you know, more reliably, you can hit W and go deal bonus damage there. The 10 flat damage W, not a huge problem as well. You know, obviously does more in the early game, but yeah, hey, a lot more W spam to deal damage very early on. The other thing is a very, very small 10% AP ratio buff to Slicing Maelstrom, which, you know, if we do some like napkin math, you know, an endgame build has maybe 300 AP, you know, adding what, 60 damage to like 110. It's, you know, another 6 damage on top. It's not a huge change. It's, you know, to the tune of probably around 5% or lower, you know, 3% more damage. It's not a very big change, and ultimately, overall, Kennen gained just under 1% win rate this patch, around 13,000 games of sample, 48.5 to 49% win rate as a champion. Not in a horrible spot by any means. Did get buffed, did need the buff. In top lane, isn't doing incredibly well. Again, 48.5, 49% win rate is not horrible. In the mid lane, interestingly, in this patch, doing reasonably well. If you look at the previous patch to get more data, actually, yeah, mid lane Kennen is actually really quite decent. Mid lane Kennen is probably around a 51% win rate mid laner, is my guess on his overall power level, 51 and change. So, though we don't see a lot of mid Kennen, actually a pretty solid champion there, one worth considering. Just, you know, maybe a deep cut for you, but mid Kennen seems pretty solid. Top Kennen is okay. Again, not great, but if it's a good matchup for him, or if it's the comp or whatever, you need matchup damage, Kennen is, I think, viable at the very least. Lee Sin the next in the pool of champions getting energy buffs, just simply lower energy costs so that he can play out the fight for longer, do a little bit better there. Lee Sin was a big loser of the durability update. Something that could be that he is a little bit assassin-y, a little bit divery in his play pattern, where it's like, yeah, I'm going to kick in the AD carry and kill them, but it's like if the AD carry lives 10% longer and is able to flash away by not getting bursted, Lee Sin's value goes down. If Lee Sin's power is his ability to duel and deal early damage, and people are too durable early game for him to kill people, early ganking power, and people don't die, like that kind of lowers power level, as well as just simply running out of energy in a team fight. So energy costs are down on Q2, W2, and E2. This ends up being not a very big deal, much like Kennen. About 0.75% win rate buff across 72,000 games is still about a 45.5% win rate champion in the hands of the average jungler in solo queue. So sadly, for most mere mortals, Lee Sin is really completely non-viable. That's too bad. He's one of my favorite champions, but in the hands of most players, not really a situation here you can play this champ out. So unlucky there, but yeah, if they want to get him back into solo queue, at least for average players, it's going to take a lot more work than this. Leona is getting a 10 mana cost buff on Shield of Daybreak. Worth noting that Shield of Daybreak's only rank up incentive is flat damage on the Q, as well as the mana cost here. I don't think the mana cost should scale at all, to be honest, because the cooldown doesn't change, so why even bother? I think a lot of cases, scaling mana costs are probably kind of a dead mechanic outside of wave clear abilities where it's intended to make your wave clear not just infinite at level 9. I think otherwise, mana cost scaling, it feels a little weird at this point in time in League of Legends. It used to have that every ability scale to mana cost. It feels like there's just not a reason for that anymore. Unless, again, they're AoE abilities, and Riot wants to make sure you don't infinitely wave clear just by hitting level 7 or level 9 or something, which I think is actually a pretty good spot for scaling mana cost. Either way, though, Hero Daybreak is down by 10 mana cost, Solar Flare up by quarter second stun and slow, which is kind of nice. Here is the mana cost data table. Keep in mind that because, again, nothing with the flat damage scales on rank, it's just, and Leona's don't go past level 13 in most games. It's just 45 becomes 35. It is a short cooldown, which is nice. And of course, the ultimate stun duration matters quite a bit here as well. Ends up being about a 1% flat win rate buff to Leona across 45,000 games of sample. In average solo queue, she is a 50 and 1/4% win rate champion. So bang on accurate for a buff overall. She is doing just fine in solo queue. We'll see what happens in pro play. Leona certainly was a relatively viable champion. Leona may indeed overtake as the most picked tank champion, but certainly in a reasonable spot for solo queue. So yeah, if you like playing Leona, she is completely fine. I mean, technically very slightly on the strong side, but again, matchups matter more than at that point the 0.2% winner difference. So yeah, pretty good champion. We move on to Lillia, who gets an increase in the damage cap on her passive when burning monsters. Does not affect her healing, does not affect her damage to things like small raptors whose health is too low, does not affect her damage to enemy champions, all that stuff. But look, let's say you press Q and you manage to land it onto a monster. How much damage is Q doing, to like Dragon or Baron or whatever, assuming you are not recasting so quickly that you are only getting 3/4 duration of the burn, and you're refreshing already, and the damage being carried by Q. So like this is maximal case buff, right? This is maximal case buff where it's 1 Q and a full use of your passive, and you're not cutting down the duration by refreshing it. You're not using more abilities for damage output. This is maximal case. And obviously, like at level 13, guess what? You're recasting Q more frequently. The W is coming in there. Your actual clear speed is obviously not buffed by this much. But in a world where you literally just Q and walk away onto a monster, here's the numbers. And it's about an 8 to 9% damage buff. Okay, great. If we're hitting damage cap. Now, this table is how much health your monster needs to reach the damage cap. This is using an approximation of how much AP she would normally build, considering that as she builds AP, her percent health damage goes up from 6% to 7 to 8 to 9. But the damage cap, as far as I can tell, is not affected by ability power. I think that's a mistake, but whatever. Here's how much health a monster needs to reach the damage cap. And you can see anything like a big Krug, you're hitting the cap. Red buff, hitting the cap. Blue buff, hitting the cap. Dragon, Baron, at all points in time, you're hitting the cap. This is around how much health I believe medium wolves and relatively close to how much health medium Krug has. But if you're not hitting this number, there is no buff. Okay? If you don't have at least this much health, there is no buff. And unless you have at least this much health, you're not getting the full buff. So again, small raptors, not affected. Medium wolves, maybe barely affected. I'm not quite certain. I don't have the numbers top of my head. But Gromp, red, blue, all that stuff, full power, right? So you're getting the full 8% more damage, which, yeah, meaningfully affects how good her clear looks. Keep in mind that her actual DPS also has 10 damage per second off of the jungle item burn. This is total damage over the course of like 4 seconds. So it's, still like, 30 DPS became 35 DPS. Well, there's another 10, so it's 40 becomes 45, right? Her auto attacks matter, all that stuff. Still, though, this is a clear speed increase. It does matter. This ends up being around a... where did it go? Oh, it ends up being around a 1% win rate buff to Lillia. So in the jungle, she is solidly at 50 3/4, 26,000 game sample. Pretty confident that she is a overall strong jungler. Is in a pretty good spot. AP junglers are fun to see. Lillia's one of my favorite junglers. Really like playing her. And yeah, completely viable, very much playable. So cool. Obviously, it doesn't have a huge effect on how she clears from top lane. Yes, she'll poach Krugs once in a while. Yes, she'll help kill Rift Herald once in a while. She'll help kill Dragon once in a while. She'll help kill Baron once in a while. It is a non-zero amount of power to top lane Lillia, sure. And top lane Lillia, by the way, very powerful. Definitely a strong champion. But yeah, solid 1% winner bump, Lillia jungle, very viable, very worth playing, go for it. Master Yi loses a rank up on his E. Now I want to point out that it is still true that E max is the best build for Master Yi. At least was true up until this patch. I can look, but there's only limited data for this so far. But Master Yi was OP, E max was his best build. Early suggestions with data, though data is limited, suggest that Emax is still correct on Master Yi, though grain of salt here. Emax loses one more cooldown incentive because, sure, ultimately, E's rank up is still very valuable. Keep in mind, E's damage applies to Q, so ranking up E literally increases Q damage. But it turns out you just play an on-hit build, you get max rank E by level 9, and you're going to feel better about it. Or level 10, you can do like 3 points Q sometimes, I think. But ultimately, yes, Master Yi loses some power. If you're doing Q max, you're going to feel this from levels 8 onwards. If you're doing E max, you're going to feel it from level 4 onwards. Or if you're doing 3 points Q, you're going to feel it from like level 7 onwards. Regardless, though, this is obviously power down. Ends up being about 0.5% win rate down on Master Yi. He's sitting at about 52% win rate in hands of the average player. So not giga busted, though still relatively strong. Data don't have a ton of that in terms of how much his elo skew functions, but he's in the spot here where he is definitely strong in the average player, and you can go for it, and you're going to feel pretty good about that one. Here's the data table of the cooldown. This is it. If you're doing Qmax, here is it if you're doing direct Emax right away. Again, moderate nerf, 0.5% win rate, right? Not a huge deal by any means, but does bring him down a tad, 50%. Not an egregious win rate, though obviously relatively high. Qiyana gets hit pretty hard, actually. Qiyana not only lost a lot of damage on her passive, the way her passive works is that if she autos you or lands a spell on you, she deals a bunch of bonus damage. If she grabs a new element, each element has functionally a new cooldown on that target. So if you come in and throw a water Q and then grab grass and throw a grass Q, you get 2 passive hits here, right? There's additionally a bug where you could get the passive an extra time because of First Strike. Obviously a big deal there as well. So what's happened? Well, the passive damage is down by a 0.15 bonus AD ratio and no First Strike double hitting, which is obviously pretty meaningful as well. So you can look at what's going on with this champion. And we can see how much damage is the passive providing before and after from the AD ratio nerf, and it's something like this. Now, worth noting that there's not a ton of data. Qiyana is not incredibly popular. And additionally, it is, under 24 hours into the patch, as far as I can tell. So data's not really out there if she has a better keystone now instead. But this overall change ended up being about a 3% win rate nerf to... we're going to pay them together. First Strike Qiyana, because everyone's still running First Strike on her. She might find a better keystone. I don't know. I'm going to look really quickly at 12.14 data and see if there's anything that was, relatively similar in power level. And not as far as I could tell, there wasn't a keystone at around 50% win rate. Electrocute was about 3% win rate below First Strike. Considering First Strike lost about 3% win rate, and there were more direct nerfs that weren't just to First Strike. I don't expect Electrocute to replace, although I think it's going to end up being relatively close in power level. But it appears as though First Strike, early data could be wrong, is on average the correct choice. But this pulls Qiyana down to a 47% win rate champion. She lost a lot of power in this patch in the hands of the average player, who was bang on balance 50%. Though might be nerfed because of ultra high elo, not because of low elo. Could have, last I've checked, Qiyana had very substantial MMR skew toward high MMR, so could easily still be a problem there. But a very, very large nerf, again, around 3%, and the biggest nerf of the patch. Then we look at Rammus, and Rammus gets some pretty interesting changes up here. Technically lowering his level scaling a little bit here, but flattening the R cooldown pretty meaningfully, minus 20, minus 5, plus 10. But the nice thing is a hugely increased cast range, how much the cast range increases with move speed, and then also the overall dash goes faster, which seems pretty good. So technically, the time to duration is slower, but like the overall dash speed is higher, so who really cares? Like in a world where it's like, I was going to dash 600 units, now I dash 800 units. Technically, dashing 600 took less time than dashing 800 does, but that's really freaking troll to call that a nerf, because it's not. You're objectively faster in all cases. But it, it's not like, if it took 1 second, it still takes 1 second, but you're still going faster and you're still going farther. Obviously, a buff to Rammus. And we can look at our cooldown, and again, better for the first levels of the game. Gonna be a buff overall. Rammus is up about 1.25% win rate, resting at a 52% win rate, and change across 24,000 games for average players in solo queue on the patch. Now, there is a note right here that is very, very important, and it's use Ghost, not Chem Tank. So people are improving here. But the most common Mythic and most common secondary summoner spell are both wrong. Rammus really, 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 really cares about slows. Okay? He cares about being slowed. He cares about slowing himself. And guess what? Sunfire Aegis burns around that. Also, Rammus is actually a bit of a damage champion. Think about how long Tremors last. Think about how long, right, Taunt plus Ball Curl, all that stuff lasts. Like, guess what? He actually wants to sit in the fight for longer and deal more damage. Like, he's going to close the gap on you by ulting you anyway. The Flash doesn't do much more. He's ulting on to go land the Powerball on you regardless. And if you flash, you've already flashed. Like, yeah, you could flash follow, sure. Like, there are cases once in a while where you could have flash followed, but guess what? Bringing Ghost early on is way more gank power because you are functionally Nocturne if you run Ghost. Because guess what? Ghost is available at level 1 for the power, well, at level 2 for the I killed red buff. I'm going to go Powerball taunt someone. That's just a first blood if it's a Darius. Like, that's just first blood top lane by, you know, queuing Raptors, suffering through killing it, and then, like, the Fiora just dies. Like, she's just dead. Run Ghost, don't run Chem Tank. Sunfire is far more damage, and of course an overtuned item. Sunfire is slow resist. Ghost is just more functional in a team fight. Guess what? If you're running Ghost and Sunfire, you are faster than normal champions with Ball Curl on. Guess what? You're unstoppable. You just fight them. You're invincible. You deal like 80 damage extra on hit, and they can't do anything about it. You just win. So please use Ghost, not Chem Tank. Use Ghost, not Flash. Use Sunfire, not Chem Tank. Trust me, it is incredibly pog. If you make this choice, Rammus is the best jungler in the game. Seriously, this champ is free low. If you build him correctly, it's actually busted, at least for most people. In the hands of people who are building him 2/3 incorrectly. 52% win rate, very strong in the patch overall, even with a bad build, but use a good build, you're going to be very, very happy. Target access is going to feel really good in this champion. Next up, a champion who did not need buffs. Shen was already doing pretty well, but getting a small mana refund or energy refund buff using his passive or his E of 0, 5, and 10. This ends up being about a 0.75% win rate buff to Shen overall, around 28,000 game sample. He is 52.5% win rate overall, very, very strong. Shen is really good. Go ahead and play Shen. Great champ, very strong champ, and he's buffed, which I really, really don't think he needed. Probably going to see Shen nerfs in the near future because I think he needs them. We go to Singed, and Singed actually got way more than I thought he would. Now, Singed is a very unpopular champion, so any data at day 1 is going to be pretty high volatility, but we still have almost 10,000 games of sample, which puts, which makes us pretty confident within 1% win rate of what the numbers are, and so this ends up, it appears to be a roughly 3% win rate buff. Now, it could realistically be a 2% win rate buff, and it wouldn't be that big of an aberration of data, but like it's overwhelmingly likely at least a 2% win rate buff here. His bonus move speed on running near a champion is up 5%. The cooldown doing that is down by 2 seconds. This ends up being a pretty big deal, where if you can get someone at all, you can outrun them, right? If Renekton dives on you to go kill you, it's like, well, I have extra move speed to outrun you. If I, you know, have my jungler come gank, I run past my jungler, get a bit more move speed there. Like, turns out the move speed buff really, really matters, because the R buff is, I think, very, very small. But this seems to put him at around 52.5% win rate in top lane. Mid lane data is very limited because, well, there's not a lot of mid lane data because Singed mid is not popular. But looking at data from the previous patch to see what we can look at here, Predator basically went away for Singed, and he was an okay mid laner, around 51% win rate. If he gained around 3% win rate in mid like he did in the top lane, then yeah, he's looking at like a 53, 54% mid lane win rate. Right now, data is too limited, it's suggesting 4.5. That's almost certainly incorrect. But again, doing really well, 52% win rate top laner, 53% win rate mid laner, probably where he lands. But let's look at the actual data itself. And this is specifically, assuming you are only stacking health and AP and you're not buying things like Merc Treads because you can go Swifties, you're going, Demonic Embrace, not Sunfire, Liandry's, all that kind of stuff, then the Armor MR buff from R goes right into his base stats. This is the average Armor and MR of the champion, before and after with R on. And then with 66 average armor MR becoming 76 average armor MR, that is a overall durability gain of about 6%. So with his ult on, Singed is 6 to 2% more durable post-patch, and then of course rank through the ult is the same. Now the other thing is Q damage with the R on, as his AP is up 10, 5, and 0. How much AP would he have in a typical, looking at a Riley's Demonic, Leandry's or Riftmaker or Rocket Belt, that kind of stuff. Like if you're building AP items at every slot, roughly, okay, what would your Q rank be? What would your AP be? Okay, let's filter in. All right, what should you be getting from the ult then? And the 10 and 5 bonus ability power ends up being a, 4 to 1% to eventually no damage increase. So, a moderate increase in power in the early through mid game after the immediate landing phase. A bit more durability, a bit more damage going on. I will say Singe's ultimate cooldown is relatively short. It's felt up anytime you need it when I'm roaming. So, anytime you're getting into a meaningful fight, I have felt as a Singed player that's up relatively frequently. And honestly, between the ult buff, which I think is actually relatively small, but not 0, and this buff, which apparently is a pretty big deal, this seems to be around a 3% win rate buff to Singed, and he is back to being quite strong. Singed really does seem to be in a very good spot here. Cool buffs to Singed, and they're things that, Singed players actually care about. So cool stuff there. Sivir, just too good, needs your medicine. 53 and change percent win rate pre-patch, loses almost exactly 1% win rate on the patch. Of course, has become an incredibly popular champion for being OP, but also getting a nice kit update, losing some late game power. Now, it's worth noting that Sivir appears to be actually a mid-game spiking champion, and that at the end of the day, if you're 45 minutes in, you just don't always have the safety to free hit and throw boomerangs around, it seems like. So even though Q keeps scaling, W keeps scaling, E is not an actual rank up, right? It doesn't really matter. In fact, it's going worse as a rank up at this point in time. So she doesn't really have a final ability to rank up, and also her ult didn't really have that much value in ranking up either. So, around level 13, she kind of stopped getting ability points. And even though, yes, Ricochet, of course, can do a million damage in team fights, turns out that she just had other competition that was even better, that really wanted to go to level 18, that just cared more about levels. Tristana gains attack range, things like that. Not that she's bad late game, but in the cohort of AD carries, a lot of AD carries are really, really happy to go late game. And many of them are happy at level 18 than Sivir is. That's all I'm really saying, that it's not that she's bad late game, she's just more better in mid game, and then compared to her competition, not quite as strong there. So attack growth is down, spell shield rank up gets a bit worse. To be fair, E max second was never correct, but it's another thing going down towards the late game. So let's take a look at Sivir data. So her base AD before and after, down 0 to 4%. Okay. Here is her win rate at game time. So this is I believe at unanimous surrender, 54% win rate. Again, pretty OP champion. This is at 20 minute surrender. This is at 25 minutes. Then we have at 30 minutes and 35 minutes. I believe are the numbers, but you can kind of see the slope where it goes up. Feels really, really good around 20, 25, maybe almost 30 minutes. And then as we go past 30 minutes, guess what? Other AD carries, if she hasn't beaten them yet, begin to take over. Now, there are interesting things around data where any time that your champion is good at stalling, you are functionally pushing your losses later on. So you can think about champions like Anivia and Ziggs and indeed Sivir and indeed Victor, where if you have functionally lost the game at 28 minutes. This game is over. You're down Dragon's Soul. You managed to steal a Baron to stay alive, but you have lost this game. It's 90-10, 95-5, whatever. Any champion who can stall pushes that loss from 29 minutes into 31, 32, 33, 34 minutes. So there is automatically a you can almost call it a survivorship bias. It's not really the right term for it, but there is an inherent bias here where any wave clear champion is going to have a lower win rate late game than mid game because, well, if the game ended in 25 minutes, well, I wasn't losing because I wave cleared mid. Because I threw Q and threw W and you didn't kill our inhibitor. You had to go for the Baron, you had to go for the next dragon, give us a chance. Now, that does give you the chance of making a comeback, sure. And so, as I said earlier, well, she doesn't scale as well as compared to other champions. I still believe that is true with the amount of win rate drop we see going down 4 or 5% from her peak. I don't believe that is only because she has wave clear. You will not see that big of a drop on champions like Anivia or champions like Ziggs. This is a 2-item, 3-item spike power curve. This is what this is. This is what this looks like. But some of this win rate drop will be because of that. Because of the fact that she won't lose 28-minute game because she'll just wave clear a bit more. And that loss gets pushed a little bit later on. That's just generally going to be, I think, true. Anyway, though, again, base AD is down a little bit. Though keep in mind, every item that she buys does have raw AD on it. Kraken, PAD, IE, Bloodthirster, all those kinds of things all have raw AD on them. We don't go Hurricane on the champion. We don't go Rapid Fire on the cannon, Rapid Fire on the champion. So, she's going to keep getting bonus AD, and this nerf won't be quite as big as it looks like on this column. Cooldown, okay, great. It's down 2 seconds. I don't know the reason behind nerfing the rank up incentive. Again, Emax second already wasn't performant from solo queue data, but whatever. It makes her late game even worse. I mean, certainly her late game safety is going to be down. Having 18 instead of 14-second cooldown on this, sure, of course. If the call is just no, she has a little bit too much late game safety with the cooldown refund on her R, I accept that. And, as a design choice, sure. But anyway, still overall quite strong. 52 and change, 52.5% win rate. Very, very strong champ overall. Definitely really, really good. But worth noting that from early data, both Sivir and Singed have the exact same solo queue win rate. Also Rammus. All three, by the way. Now, certainly Rammus and Singed are much less popular than Sivir. They have harder counters than Sivir. But in terms of power in the average game where they're not getting countered, because by the way, Sivir has Twitch, who just stomps that lane and the game state. Assuming you can play the champions at an average level, Sivir, Rammus, and Singed are the same power level. By the way, they are equally performant in solo queue. Taliyah is getting a nerf who has been doing a bit too well. She is, I believe, high MMR skewed, doing too well in solo queue, doing high elo solo queue, and certainly a very big champ in pro play as well. Simple 2-second cooldown nerf on the E, and Weaver's Wall gets a 1-second lower duration, which they're hoping is going to be a bit more of a skill testing factor of the character, and they can lower it in high MMR without lowering it in low MMR quite as much. Oh yeah, here's the Sivir R cooldown, by the way. Not a huge deal, but it does exist. Also a nerf, so here's Taliyah E cooldown. Overall, it's being a 1.25% win rate nerf, roughly. I mean, it's going to be 1 plus or minus a bit, but a reasonable nerf. In the hands of the average player, 48 and change % win rate. Again, relatively unpopular champion. There's not a lot of data. There's some variance here that we're not, you can't say for sure it's 48 and a quarter, but it's going to be around there. She's playable, but not strong in the average game. Again, I think she has high MMR skew, but here is equal as part of that nerf. And yeah, probably gets kicked out of being a huge deal in pro play, though still viable. Next up is Thresh, who not doing too well overall in the hands of the average player, buffing 1 second cooldown on Q and 20 flat damage on Q. Any ability with a cooldown incentive on the rank up. Anytime the cooldown goes down, you are more incentive to then finish maxing Q, because 12 to 11 is a bigger deal than 20 to 19. This buffs Q max builds more than it buffs non-Q max builds, although that gets washed a little bit with 20 flat damage getting added. We'll see. Now, worth noting, though, that I dove into Thresh data pre-patch, and the sooner you rank W and the sooner you rank E, the better Thresh does. Q max into E max is his single worst build. Every other permutation of skill order is better for Thresh than the most common one, which is Q max, E max. Now, is that maybe a design problem? Yeah, I think so. But W max is his most performant build. E max is right behind that. W into E is his single best build. E to W is basically second place. I forget if WQ is better than EW, but regardless, the sooner you rank W and the sooner you rank E, the better he is. Now, the coolest version of Thresh is not shield max Thresh. I think things should be done to fix that. Just kill the cooldown incentive entirely, for example, which I believe still exists on this champion. I can double check to make sure he even has one, but I'm pretty sure there's a cooldown incentive on W. There is, yeah, they should probably kill the cooldown incentive on W. They should probably consider killing the cooldown incentive on Flay, or killing it more than it currently is. Because I think the coolest version of Thresh is Q max Thresh, and guess what? The pro play problem version of Thresh was Shield Max Guardian. And the version of Thresh we're going to see in pro play, probably Shield Max Guardian. So I think a lot of work could be done to make Thresh more exciting and higher win rate and not a pro play problem. He is in the hands of the average player in solo queue, not doing too well. But again, if you do the right build, it's probably the less cool version of the champion, but it's the stronger version of the champion, which is W max, E max. And you just rely on the incredible reliability of Flay, the incredible reliability of Lanterns. The shielding is good. You run Guardian, and you're going to be happy. Guardian is his least picked keystone. That is incorrect. It is his best keystone. Shield Max Guardian is the best and least interesting version of Thresh, but it's still true. Here is the data on Thresh, though. Here's the cooldown, assuming Q max before and after. Here is the damage on Q before and after. Now, technically, the damage is actually less good than this because you get AP from souls, but whatever. Zed now is able to mimic his spells from his shadow with no range limit. That's kind of cute. Gets a 10 energy cost reduction on you, which is actually a pretty big deal. I have felt playing Zed. Very rarely. I'm not a big Zed player, but you definitely can easily run out of energy playing this champion. I do think lowering energy constraints is a really good way to fix MMR skew on champs like this. I don't know if Zed has MMR skew. I know they've done a really good job with Akali overall. But Zed, if he does have skew, I think energy constraints are really good for it. Anyway, Zed gained a lot from this. A lot of games. He's very, very popular. 56,000 games of sample on the first day already. Gained around 1.5% win rate. And we're very confident that's like, yeah, it's like almost exactly 1.4% win rate. Like, gained a lot here. And he's sitting at 51% win rate on the patch, and he has the average player. So Zed, I'm sorry to say, everyone, Zed is strong. Zed is an objectively strong champion in the average game in the hands of the average player. He's a good champion. Good luck, everyone. All I can say. Pretty good. Divine Sunderer gets a healing cut of about 1/6. So down goes that item a little bit. Certainly seems to be overperforming, so a good nerf there to cut that one down. The more interesting ones, though, are Mercurial Scimitar getting 10 MR and a quick duration on the Quicksilver active, and Sivir Dawn getting 5 MR and a quick buff on the 3-second duration of Tenacity and Slow Resist. So we can take a look at item efficiency of all of these items. Here's Mercurial before and after, here's Silver before and after, and then here is Ma for a quick comparison. So, of course, gold efficiency goes up with getting 10 extra MR. That ends up being around 200 gold in total value, and brings it pretty efficient in stats, but you bring a QSS online, they're only paying around 80 gold for. Of note, interestingly enough, 20% crit chance and 300 health have the exact same gold value. So Silver Dawn and Mercurial Scimitar, by the way, have the exact same gold efficiency. I think it's kind of cute. Like, it's you know, it does make the comparison a bit easier, where it's like, yes, I can go Mercurial Scimitar. If I would like to go Silvermere, I can get 300 health instead of some crit chance. I might consider that valuable if I'm getting Dove a bunch, and it's like, I need this to survive, like, I don't know, Malzahar or something, who's like flash ulting me, and then like Veigar tries some shit or whatever. It's like, well, I need to get rid of the stun or the ulti or whatever, so I'll pick Silvermere Dawn, and with 300 health, I might survive a bit more. The other option, though, of course, is if you're going towards the durability update or durability version, is the Maw of Malmortius, right? And what's interesting, and I actually wouldn't mind this happening, I would actually like to see these items have more similar stats. It doesn't really matter, but it is kind of weird that, like, when I'm choosing Scimitar versus Ma, I know they're not the same item, but it's like, okay, the prices are close, but not the same, which is a little, I don't know. The MR is lower here. I don't know, like, it's really weird, right? Like, this is not... I'm explaining the point badly. Certainly, Ma is more durability, right? It's more MR, and it's a fat shield, and there's really no world where, like, you think Silvermere is more durability either, right? And so, through that lens, I think the item succeeds. You don't need the numbers to be the same numbers, because, like, hey, guess what? If you're dying because Veigar is pressing QWR on you, 10 more MR and a fatty shield is just better than, 10 less MR and 300 health. You're basically always going to get more out of Lifeline than out of Silvermere's bump. So it's like, through this lens, the item clearly succeeds, and like, in that the numbers are bigger in the right spots. The only thing that feels very slightly weird is that Ma is also more damage output. So it's more durability and more damage and cheaper, but one gets a cleanse. And I mean, maybe that's fine. It's like, Silvermere is slightly worse in all avenues, but here's a cleanse instead. I think it's actually, I guess to be fair, I'm logicking myself into agreeing with the design as it is right now, so I'm, maybe just being silly here. But like, I guess the only thing I would say is being a little bit worse everywhere does feel a little strange. Maybe it shouldn't, maybe that's fine, maybe that's actually correct. It's like, yeah, here's 15 less AD and no haste, and it's less health than it's going to be a shield, and it's less MR than before, and the cost is higher, like, but it is a lot of axes for this item to be worse, right? It is a lot of axes where it's like, oh yeah, by the way, and if this is, let's call it 300 on the shield, right? Right? If it's 300 on the shield, which, I don't know, it requires 130 bonus AD, which is like mythic one item Ma, roughly. That seems, I mean, I feel like it's pretty reasonable to land on. It's like, okay, well, this item is 4,100 gold in stats. So am I paying 1,200 gold for a cleanse active? Right? Like, right? That's the total value of this item, right? Theoretically, is 4,100. So it's like, am I really going to skip Ma for Silvermere? And that's the only reason why I bring up, to circle back to the earlier point about like items being a bit more similar, is I don't think it's obvious that Silvermere is actually costing you 1,200 gold for the cleanse. And considering that Silvermere and Scimitar have the same cost efficiency, theoretically you're doing the same thing here as well. Where it's like, ooh, do I really want to pay that much gold for that active? Where it's like, you know, if these items really were, hey, it's 55 attack damage, 55 attack damage, 50 MR, you know, 50 MR, and it's like, okay, this has haste and a big shield, this is a cleanse, you know, I don't know if that's like the appropriate comparison for the items, to be fair. But I don't know. Those thoughts going in my head. I don't think this is necessarily wrong. I mean, obviously the items got buffed and that's good. I am glad these items give relatively similar stats. It makes them easier to compare, which is a good thing. I think when players are comparing items, I think, so I guess here's a thought, right? So the reason why I talk about consistency on items a lot is players have a limited amount of time to make choices in the shop, right? And when they see, here's Ma, here's Ma, here's Scimitar or Silvermere Dawn. It's like, okay, I've got to choose what I want. And it's like, okay, well, this one has 5 more AD, that one has 50 more health, that one has 10 more MR, that one has 10 more ability haste, that one has an active, and it's like, I don't know which one I want. Whereas, like, in a world where these items are balanced, and it's like, well, they both give 45 MR, or all 3, and they all give 50 attack damage, and then they all have one stat different. This one has haste, this one has health, this one has crit. You know, like, that makes it a little easier to compare the items. In a world where Ma has the same 300 health, but, like, also has the shield, it's like, oh, do I want an even bigger shield to survive Magic Burst, or do I want this Quicksilver Cleanse? You know? Because that's what you're really buying this for, right? Like, in every world, you're not buying Ma because of the ability haste, you're buying Ma because it's like, oh, I need an offensive item that lets me survive the mages I'm against. Which is fine. It's right. It's an offensive item to survive mages. Okay, great. Yes, I'm taking damage to Azir, I'm taking damage to Lillia, I want to go Ma. Here's Silvermere Dawn. It's an offensive item to make me survive mages. But it has a cleanse. Alright, what am I paying for the cleanse then? Everything on the item is worse. Like, that one just feels weird to me, I guess. And maybe it shouldn't, I don't know. But the change is literally every stat is worse. Attack damage, amount of durability gained, and cost. All 3 are worse, but you get a cleanse. I don't know, like, oh, and build path is worse, arguably, because Hextrigger is, like, really, really, really good as an item. I don't know, that's how my brain feels about this, and it's why I like consistency in items that are clearly meant to be direct comparisons. Spending a lot of time in this one, it's not a really big deal, but either way, again, I'm glad these items got buffed. That's my tangent on items. First Strike, of course, gets directly nerfed here as well. I talked about Qiyana earlier. This does close the gap of First Strike compared to Electrocute a little bit, of course. Zon Cup is in a week and a half. That'll be exciting. Spellbook buffs and nerfs. And if your MMR is Masters Plus, you cannot duo queue. If your MMR is Masters or higher, you cannot duo queue. Alrighty. Patch 12.15 TLDR, let's talk about it. First things first, Akali gets 20 more energy on pressing W. Not a huge deal, but certainly a very small buff. She is relatively viable in solo queue. Has the occasional pro play. Akali feels actually relatively balanced. Okay, sure. Gwen, a big pro play problem. Sadly, not very good in solo queue for most players. Getting Pretty meaningful damage cut here, converting her damage, less of her damage to true damage. We can scroll up and look at this real quick. And here is, I guess, someone who doesn't buy any MR. They're simply a melee champion, and you're doing 6 to 10% less damage. If they do buy MR, you're doing 8 to 20% less damage if they're buying a lot of MR. So a pretty big damage cut here if you are getting the center snip on Q. The rest of her kit is unaffected, but those are the numbers. Really, really big nerf for most players in solo queue. Pretty dead champion. Kalista loses 3 AD. Not a huge deal, but of course is a nerf. Loses under 1% win rate. Relatively viable champion. Going to be a bit less oppressive in pro as well. Kennen gets some cooldown and damage incentives on his W, and some damage on his R. Overall ends up being a relatively small buff of around 1%. Ends up being a relatively powerful, pretty playable champion overall. So pretty solid aim here, I would say. Lee Sin is sadly in the dumpster in the hands of pretty much everyone in solo queue. This energy buff ends up being a pretty big deal for him, almost a 1% win rate buff, but still a 45% win rate solo queue champion, which is not great. Leona gets a pretty nice buff though, 10 mana cost off of Q, an ability you max last in the first place, and a quarter second duration on Solar Flare is a 1% win rate buff, and she lands in a pretty good spot in solo queue, very much playable, a little bit strong, good size buff. Lillia gets a bit more damage in the jungle. We can show the data table on that real quick, because this is if you were hitting the damage cap. Here's the damage of 1Q plus a full duration passive. It is 8 to 9% more damage if they at least have this much health. Now, they don't have at least this much health. There is no buff at all. And the maximum buff is when they have at least this much health. So red buff, blue buff, Gromp, Big Krug, things like that, Dragon, Baron, those are all going to get the entire buff here. But little raptors, little wolves, not so much. Still, though, ends up being around a 1% win rate buff to Lillia, who ends up being a pretty solid spot in solo queue. Master Yi's rank up on E, one of them goes away. Early data still suggests that E Max Master Yi is the correct build for him, and he is overall a 52% win rate champion in the hands of the average player. Qiyana gets a couple of nerfs this patch. They're nerfing her passive, they're making her passive not double hit with first strike as a bug, and they're nerfing first strike by 1% bonus damage. This ends up being a pretty big nerf to her overall. This is around 3% win rate, which puts her in a very bad spot for the average player in solo queue. So pretty dead for solo queue, at least in average elo, though I think she still has high MR skew, and fair enough there. Next up is Rammus, gets a bunch of really nice buffs to his ultimate. It goes farther, it goes faster, and for the most part has a shorter cooldown. It's being about a 1.25% win rate buff. Rammus is definitively strong in the hands of the average player in solo queue, and also people are building him wrong. Sunfire plus Ghost, not Chem Tank plus Flash. You will be a lot stronger. You will feel very good about it. I recommend you play that build. It'll feel really good. Shen gets a little bit more energy back from his E. I believe he did not need this buff, or his passive, by the way. They both refund energy. Ends up being a nearly 1% win rate buff. He is a 52.5% win rate champion. He is much too strong, I believe, and really did not need this change. So disagree somewhat. I know they intend to help energy champions have more energy in the team fights, but I would have liked, if they wanted this for sure, just because they want to have more energy to fight, I would have liked them to find a compensation nerf somewhere, because I believe he is doing too well. Singed ended up getting a surprisingly very, very large buff. Obviously, data is a bit shy on day one for an unpopular champion like Singed, but is doing incredibly well. This is, appears to be about a 3% win rate buff for the champion, which is really, really nice looking. The bonus move speed on the passive, the lower cooldown on it, both very, very useful. The standard potion is not being that big of a deal. It's like a 5% durability increase and 5% damage increase early on, and then it's like 2% when you have rank 2 of the ability, and the rank 3 is identical. So this ends up being a pretty small buff, but this ends up being a very, very big deal. Again, about a 3% win rate buff, and Singed looks to be in a very, very good spot. Sivir was definitively overpowered, loses some AD growth, loses some cooldown on Spell Shield, and loses some cooldown on the Hunt. She is a very, very strong mid-game champion, but very strong at all points in time, don't get me wrong. Ends up being an only 1% win rate nerf on the champion, so not that big of a deal overall. But yes, a bit weaker, though still very, very strong. Go ahead and keep playing Sivir. Also, keep playing Twitch the Counter. It's very, very good. Kog'Maw also works really well into Sivir. Basically, their kits bypass Spell Shield, and that makes them very good. Taliyah is not OP in the average player's solo queue hands, but is high MR skewed and a big pro play champion. So 2 seconds cooldown off the E and a 1 second duration off the R. 2 seconds nerfed on Unravel Earth, if that wasn't clear. Cooldown is going up on the champion. Ends up being about a 1.25% win rate nerf. Still relatively playable in the hands of the average player in solo queue. But yes, probably still going to be in pro play some, but probably not in every game anymore. Thresh gets a 1-second cooldown buff and a 20 damage buff on Death Sentence, which is very nice. However, he is still not doing very well in the hands of the average player. The pro tip here is to play a very boring version of Thresh, where you max Lantern and max Flay and run Guardian. That is the best version of Thresh. We might see him come back in pro play with that build, even though the Q buff doesn't mean quite as much for not maxing Q, because cooldown incentives tend to matter the more you're maxing the ability. Still, though, that version of Thresh, WMAX, EMAX, Guardian, is actually quite powerful, very, very reliable, and if you want to play some more Thresh, you still do have the hooks and the Lantern play and whatnot, but a thought out there. Zed, Shadow Spellmimic range now no limit, and 10 energy cost off of the E is actually, I think, a big deal. The energy cost here ends up being a pretty solid buff to Zed, gains about 1.5% win rate, and he's solidly at 51% win rate in the hands of the average player on the patch. That's going to look really good. He's going to feel really powerful. Seems nice. Divine Slenderer loses 1/6 of its healing. Not a bad nerf. Scimitar gets 10 MR. Silvermere gets 5 MR. And they both get a very small buff to the active, half second here, and 10% increased tenacity and slow resist for the 3-second duration on this. This ends up putting them at around like 97% gold efficient, and then buying the cleanse. However, these items still are nowhere close to Hex Drinker in terms of gold efficiency. And ultimately, if you really, really need the cleanse, of course, go for it. Sure, go grab these items. That's all fine. But yeah, you are not getting gold efficient stats. You are paying for the QSS, which is probably fair. But you are still nowhere close to the raw damage and durability and utility that Maw brings you. So just a thought, just bringing it up, just in case that was going to be a big deal to think about. Yeah, basically that. First strike goes down by 1% increased damage. Not a huge deal, but it does matter. Clash is in a week and a half. Spellbook changes. And the final thing is, if your MMR is Masters Plus, you can no longer duo. That is the goal with that change. So that's going in on the patch. Wonderful stuff there. That's it for the patch rundown. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time. Bye-bye.